Many people around Columbus are completely unaware of what happens inside City Hall, but each day their lives are impacted by the decisions made here. From the roads we drive on, to the water we drink, to the sidewalks in our neighborhoods, to the parks we explore, to the public safety we enjoy, people are working day in and day out to make our lives better. Welcome to Council in 90, where we share stories about what's happening in your community through the work done here at City Hall. And today we're sitting down with Councilmember Rob Dorans to discuss how Council supports neighborhoods across Columbus. Welcome, Councilmember Dorans. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
So I understand that you chair the Neighborhoods Committee on Council. Can you tell us a little bit about what that committee does and your work on that committee?
Sure. So we work very closely with the Department of Neighborhoods here at the city. Department of Neighborhoods is our newest actual department for the city.
Okay.
Houses a lot of the sort of the bread and butter of government services that folks have come to expect from the city of Columbus. So things like 311, where folks can submit a service request for, whether it's a pothole, whether it's needing a new trash can, all those kind of just very basic kind of services. 311 sort of the main point of contact for a lot of citizens with the city. So that's one of the big things that the department does, and we certainly try and support them to make sure they have the most efficient service possible. We're actually working right now with the department on sort of a refresh of that system. If folks have used it before, I can tell it can be a little bit cumbersome. It's actually really cool. It was designed by city employees about 10 years or so ago.
Okay.
But as you might imagine, in 10 years, things change on the internet, things change in websites.
Oh yes, I imagine so.
So we're doing a lot of work right now to try and upgrade that system to make sure it's as user-friendly as possible. There's already an app for it, but one of the main goals is to make sure that there's an app for folks' smartphone to be able to direct folks more closely to where is that pothole, where is that street light out, those kinds of things.
What is that? Is that app just called 311? Is that?
Yep, 311 Columbus. Okay. So you can search on any app store and it'll come up. There's a few different Columbus apps, but you'll want to make sure you get the 311 app.
What are some of the services that are provided through that? I know you mentioned a few, but
yeah. So again, it's very much how Columbus does a lot of our service requests. So one of the big things, and you'll see this around when OSU moves out, right? You'll see couches and mattresses all left in the alleyways and that kind of thing. Folks think that refuge just picks those things up.
Yeah.
You actually have to file a bulk service request for the right truck to come get those kinds of things. So whether it's on campus or whether you're moving houses in a different neighborhood in town, it's really important for folks to be able to schedule those kinds of things. So all that stuff goes through 311 and then ends up with the right department that's going to make sure that gets taken care of. So that's an example. If you got pothole season will be here soon enough, unfortunately.
Oh, yes, it will.
So when you've got that pothole that happens on your daily commute, 311's the place where you can go submit that. Again, one of the upgrades we're trying to do is to make sure that we're better able to identify where that pothole is. So you can sort of do a drop pin on it.
Okay.
That's one of the goals.
That's a pretty neat feature.
Yeah, so right now you have to sort of go in and put in different cross streets about where it is, and unfortunately, sometimes that's not the most accurate way to do it. So a lot of our refuse or our street maintenance crews will burn a lot of time sort of circling the block trying to find that one individual pothole. So that will hopefully be a way to sort of upgrade that service so folks have a better opportunity, one, to receive better service in the city of Columbus and make sure that from a city perspective we're being as efficient with our staff time and our resources as we possibly can be. So 311 is a big thing that the department does. One of the other big things that the department handles is the area commissions.
Okay.
So Columbus has 21 different area commissions, and these are real neighborhood bodies. This is, again, talking about sort of the bread and butter of what a city does.
Bread and butter sounds great.
Especially this time of day, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we have a very large city. We're growing. We have 890,000 people here in Columbus. We have hundreds of different neighborhoods. It's difficult for, as city council, there's only 7 of us. As an administration, it's difficult for us to know everything that's happened in every nook and cranny in the city of Columbus. And that's really where area commissions fill an extraordinarily vital role for us. We think of them as a true neighborhood voice to make sure that, whether it's trash concerns, whether it's zoning issues that are happening in their neighborhood, whether it's crime issues, they're really on the front lines to sort of be those folks who are interacting with us as elected officials, as a city, to make sure that those concerns on the neighborhood level are getting to the right place so we can make sure that we're responding appropriately.
Did the city always have neighborhood commissions, or area commissions, or is this kind of a new thing? Like, what's the history of these?
Yeah,
bodies?
so it goes back to the 1970s. And like any good Columbus story, it goes back to OSU football.
Of course.
Not only OSU football, but the game. So OSU was playing the team up north, and there were some issues that happened in the University District. There was actually some disturbances that happened.
No, I can't imagine that.
No, not at all, right?
No.
Same as happened in the 70s as happens today when the big game happens. And a lot of university residents came together and said, hey, look, we need a body to be able to better interact with some of the issues that come up around game day, that comes up around some large events that happens in our neighborhood, that happens when you're talking about sort of town and gown affairs, when you're talking about students interacting with the city. So that was the first area commission, was the University District. And it was a way for, again, residents to come together to make sure that the concerns they were having were making sure they were landing in the right spots with the city. And since then, we've added more and more commissions. We just added our 21st area commission. I was honored to be the individual that sponsored that legislation earlier this year to create that commission. So we're excited for that commission to exist, and we're certainly going to have more. That's probably going to happen.
Okay.
One of the things that we've had a strong, not only area commission, but a lot of civic associations around the city, and that's where we've had a number of different civic associations come together and say, hey, we want to take the next step and really work with the city from an area commission level, because one of the things that an area commission gets that a civic association potentially doesn't is that when new development comes to your neighborhood, that's where developers are going to go first. When and if there's any kind of variance or zoning variance that folks need, that area commission is going to be the first stop. Council takes the area commission's recommendations on zoning very, very, very seriously. Council has over 90% history of voting with the area commissions when it comes to us considering those requests. So it really gives, again, the neighborhood themselves the ability to have more of an input about what kind of development comes to their neighborhood. So it's appropriate for what the folks who live there want today, and hopefully what their neighborhood will look like in the future.
So an area commission will have like a set structure of meetings like council does.
Mm-hmm.
And so at these meetings they do zoning variances, and what kind of other things are they capable of talking about?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of everything under the sun. So there'll be community groups that will come and talk about the different services that are being offered in those areas. They'll work very closely with the Columbus Police Department's community liaison officer. So if there's safety concerns that are happening in the area, the area commission is a good place for neighbors to get together to talk about what's happening, potential solutions that are happening on a potential local level, and if they need to raise those concerns to council or the administration, that they have sort of a process for doing that.
Okay. So is there any involvement with So I have the Nextdoor app on my phone,
mm-hmm.
and so it seems that there's a lot of conversation about that, and area commission talk does come up a lot. Are they involved with integrating with that app, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of the issues that pop up on whether it's Nextdoor or whether it's a Facebook page for a specific area of town, a lot of the area commissioners pay pretty close attention to that, and will invite folks when and if they've got concerns that are coming up on those things to come talk to the area commission, because again, it's sort of that first liaison between what's going on in the neighborhood and the city of Columbus. So one of those things that folks are very easy to get upset and put something online. If you've got something that's really you want to have it be an advocate for in your neighborhood, it's one thing to post online, it's another thing to make sure that it gets to the right place, so that again, if there's actually an issue that's going on in your neighborhood, actually we have the opportunity from the city's perspective to address it. And that's where again I think a lot of the different area commissions have been pretty active with social media to make sure that, one, they're making sure folks know who they are, what they can do for them, but also to make sure that when those concerns come up, that we can make sure that they get to the right spot.
You're obviously pretty passionate about this work. What inspires you about what neighborhood commissions do?
So I think it goes all the way back to that true neighborhood voice, right? So I think back to when I first moved to Columbus, and I didn't know how things would work. When my wife and I bought our first house, our garbage can was just gone. We moved in, and we're how you move in, you've got all this extra trash.
With one of the large garbage tubs
and it's
things?
just gone, right?
Yeah.
So I remember popping on to 311 and being like, hey, I need a new garbage can, and within a couple days, a new one had arrived from the city. And it's, again, that sort of basic interaction between citizens and the city that I think really matters. I think we're doing a lot of very innovative things as a city and a community, but we never want to lose sight of just sort of those basics to make sure that Columbus is a place that people feel safe in. People want to set roots down here, raise a family, and making sure that we've got city services and have those interactions between the neighbors departments, the area commissions, and frankly, as a city that's continuing to change and continuing continuing to develop, that change can be scary to folks, and having infrastructure in place to make sure that residents' concerns are actually considered in that process, I think really matters. And I think the area commissions do a good job of making sure that those concerns manifest themselves into policy, and not just, again, a couple people on Facebook or a couple people on Nextdoor just complaining about something. Making sure that those concerns actually get to the right place and actually lift up what we want the city to look like. And I think that's really important.
So you talked a little bit about change in the community, and zoning is one of those changes. I know a lot of people, and probably when they hear the word zoning, their eyes probably glaze over and they're like, oh my gosh, what are they talking about? Can you talk a little bit about what zoning is and why it's important?
Yeah, so I mean, the most basic way to describe it is zoning is basically the plan we have for land in the city. So you wouldn't necessarily want a factory to be right next to a daycare center, right?
No.
You wouldn't necessarily want a car dealership next to a park or something like that. So it's really about smart land use policy, and you look at different places around the country. So for instance, a place like Houston doesn't have zoning. They just don't have it. So there's some interesting places when you go there in which you'll see, a residential area right up to a industrial area. And in that instance, the folks who built that industrial area didn't have to really comply with any rules or didn't have to go ask for any input. They could just do it. So zoning really matters for us to be able to plan a smart community about what we want where, what kind of uses we're going to allow in certain areas of the city, and how those all interact with one another. So I think it's really important for folks to be able to have a plan in place. But again, as we continue to change the city, I think it's important for us to keep an open mind about how those plans can change in the future. One of the big discussions that's going on right now at the city, and I think in the community, is about density. Housing density and transportation access, and that's a way for us to say, how do we encourage more people to live in certain areas so that they're connected to transportation options, they're connected to career opportunity options, and all that's connected right back to zoning, because there's some places that a large residential housing unit is not appropriate for. There's other places it would be. So we want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we think through our land policy in the city, because again, we're going to continue to grow. And without zoning, without being thoughtful about what zoning looks like today and what it should look like in the future, we wouldn't want to necessarily look like Houston or something in which we would have two things next to one another that wouldn't really make sense to be good neighbors. And I think zoning is all about making sure that you've got folks who feel like they've got good neighbors, that they're in a part of the community that they want to be in, and it's certainly going to be reflective of what they want that community to look like in the future. Okay.
So on the last episode of Council 90, we talked to Council Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown about the importance of fighting for fair wages and living wages in our community. You're also a very strong proponent of working families. Can you talk a little bit about how why strong neighborhoods and strong working families are connected, how that connects together?
Yeah, so economic security is vital for families. If you're not making a living wage, if you don't have access to affordable health care, if you don't have access to retirement benefits, a family doesn't have the security that they need to be able to really put down roots in a community. And I think that when we think about what wages matter, sometimes people get lost in the numbers. But it's about family. It's about people. And when I tend to think about what we want Columbus to look like, it's a place where people have the opportunity to come here and earn a living and raise a family. And that doesn't just manifest itself in like a specific number or a specific thing that we need to achieve. So from a city's perspective, I think we need to do all that we can to make sure that we're creating an environment for career opportunities to be created here and for folks to have that economic security. I've told this story to folks before, but so my dad is a union member. I'm a union member. I'm actually the first union member ever to sit on Columbus City Council.
Oh, wow.
But when I was born, my dad went on strike. So the company he was working for at the time asked for a giant cut in health care benefits. So here I am, a newborn at the hospital with my mom. And the next day, my dad's out on the picket line.
So the day after you're born, your dad went.
I was born on a Saturday. They voted for the strike over the weekend, and he was on the picket line on Monday.
Wow.
So you're talking about making sure that folks are advocating to make sure that they have the economic security people need. I mean, that was literally instilled upon me from the first days of my life. Now, obviously, I wasn't there to remember it, but certainly something that my family's made sure that I didn't forget as I grew up, and certainly something that I take very seriously as far as the ability for folks to make sure they have economic security moving forward. My folks are two people who didn't have the opportunity to go to college yet because they had the ability to earn the livings that they did. My sister and I were the first generation of our family to get to go to college. I was the first person in my family to get to go to grad school. And certainly been very honored and pleased to be able to work and organize labor for a long time as well, in addition to serving on council. And I think when we talk about what we want wages to be in our community, it's about making sure that folks have that living wage, to have an opportunity to set down roots, feel secure. And frankly, from a city's perspective, we want folks to be successful, right? We want Columbus to be a place that people have the opportunity and feel secure, and that's part of our growth. When we look at across the Midwest, there's only a few different cities that have been growing over the past 10 years, and Columbus is one of them. And one of those reasons, I think, is primarily because the career opportunities that have existed here. And I think that really matters for us to take that very, very seriously to make sure that we continue to grow, continue to be a place that people want to raise a family.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. And I know that neighborhoods are the result of the of the people who live there. And as workers have, fairer jobs, fairer wages, then the quality of that neighborhood is going to improve, and the quality of our city is going to improve. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're currently the newest member of City Council. Can you tell me a little bit about what your experience has been like so far in becoming a well-versed quality member of council as you are now?
Yeah, I think someday Councilmember Favor will stop hazing me about having one more month of seniority on me, but we'll see someday.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been a fantastic experience, I think, for anyone who's spent time at being an advocate in your community. I think we all know what that's like to make sure that you're engaging with elected officials, engaging with government to see policies that you think really would impact working families, would really make the city stronger. And certainly, prior to joining council, certainly count myself as some of the folks that wanted to advocate for those things in our community. So it's really been a pleasure to be able to not only be able to be an advocate, but also be someone who's in a position to help implement some of those policies. And also to think through what Columbus not only looks like today, but what it's going to look like in the future. And talking about the wages piece, I think it's really important to have folks that have a perspective about why living wages matter. Especially talking about Columbus being a growing city, and we're going to continue to grow, be in a position to make sure that is at the utmost priority for us. That's been great, and certainly looking to continue to be able to be an advocate for that in the future.
So I think on every episode so far, we've mentioned that Columbus is growing by nearly 50 people a day. What does that make you feel? What is your next line? What's your next thing to focus on to help prepare Columbus for the future?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things we can talk about that amount of people arriving on a daily basis, it dovetails right back into wages. It dovetails right back into infrastructure, right? So again, talking about that sort of bread and butter of making sure that we can handle, handle that growth. As a city today, we're continuing to build out infrastructure to make sure that we can handle those folks. And when people think of infrastructure, again, you talk about zoning, your eyes sort of roll back in your head, right?
No, I'm in it.
Right. Infrastructure is oftentimes people have the same sort of reaction. So whether it's water and sewer, whether it's transportation infrastructure, whether or not it's making sure that we've got the housing that's necessary for folks, I think it all gets back to how do you plan from an infrastructure perspective for the amount of people who are already here today to make sure we keep providing world-class service to those folks, but also to make sure that the services for people that are going to be needed for the growth that we're expecting exist, right? So that how do we make sure that when we're looking at water and sewer upgrades, that's being done in a way that's going to be thoughtful about where the growth is going to occur. We talk about green space in the city, a city that's developing very quickly. How do you preserve green space to make sure that folks coming here have green space in our community? When people think of infrastructure, they again tend to think it's really boring stuff. I think it's actually some of the most fascinating and interesting stuff we can do as a city is to make sure that we plan to make sure that we've got the services that we need for that growth. Because otherwise, people get here, even people arrive, and they don't have a good experience in our community, they're not going to set down those roots. They're not going to decide to make this a place for them to spend their lives. I moved here like a lot of folks. My wife went to OSU to get her PhD, and I came down here for a job opportunity, and we were here for a month or two and looked around and thought, let's never leave.
Yeah.
And that's a lot due to the kind of community that Columbus is, and a lot of the infrastructure that existed here, that traditional and non-traditional kind of ways. So I think when you talk about what's next, I think we need to continue to make sure we're doing what we do really well right now, and then make sure we're planning the future to make sure that we're going to make sure that when folks come here, they have a good experience and want to stay here.
All right, one last quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right before we started taping, you told me about something you hung up in your office. Can you tell me what that is?
So I'm a little bit obsessed with my dog.
Okay.
So people keep, you're talking about me being the newest member of council, so people keep yelling at me about not having enough decorations up in my office. It's a bit Spartan for the most part, but I did go out and splurge a little bit. I got a fat head of my dog. So if folks are unfamiliar with what a fat head is, it's basically a vinyl print off that sticks to a wall.
Yeah.
So I have a giant wall in my office now that's devoted to my dog Captain, who's the best dog ever. So, and if I'm sure there's other dog owners that are out there, I'm sure your dogs are very good as well. But Captain is the best. So people are going to be either very weirded out by it when they walk in the office, or they're going to love it. So we'll see how that happens.
I look forward to visiting your office as soon as we finish here.
Yeah.
I want to see Captain on your wall. Councilmember, thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Happy to be here.